Knows me by my name.
Oh, yes, it's a good day here at Pain Points where the world meets business. Darius Bell, Samson, Jagoras.
What's going on, bro?
Well, the ever-changing landscape of entrepreneurship.
That is true.
That's what's going on.
Yep. Every week we're trying to break it down, keep you guys on point so you know what's going on.
Well, we have a plethora of topics, but some that we're really going to dive deep on. Guys, I'm just going to run through the gambit. I'm going to break the news to you. We're not going to cover all these, but this is just what the landscape looks like in the last week. Yeah. We got Biden putting out a $7.3 trillion budget. We got Fed man.
The Fed man.
The Fed man, yes. Fed Chair Powell really lining up some harsh truths on banks that and
what's coming down the pipe. Yep.
What's coming down the pipe. Really excited to dig into that. We got TDS running wild between Robert De Niro. We got Letitia James being booed. We got algorithm updates. It's Google dying, Jordan Peterson and Tom Bilyeu. We have several different things that we can cover, but we picked out really the key ones that we think need to drive the thinking this week for you, your people, your business, and the world around you. So let's kick this one off, Samson.
Yeah, first one's on me. So a lot of you guys don't know this about me, but I got my career started as a futures and commodities broker. And so I got baptized in the deep end of the pool in 2008 when the housing market crashed. And so economics, the history of economics, the history of kind of geopolitics and the world and money and currency and where those things collide is something that I just absolutely love. Mm-hmm. So the news story we're talking about today was the comments from Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell last week. And basically, he just assured us that there is some bad banks out there, and there's going to be another bank crash, essentially. He essentially said that 60% of small banks own currently all the commercial real estate debt, which is where the looming problem currently exists. And basically, here's what he said. He said, if the economy evolves broadly as we expect, it will likely be appropriate to begin dialing back policy restraint at some point this year. But the economic outlook is uncertain, and ongoing progress towards our 2% inflation objective is not assured. Even so, Powell told committee members that there's no evidence and there's no reason to think that the U.S. economy is in or in some kind of short-term risk of falling into a recession. Mm-hmm. Far from it. Powell said the Fed was on a good path to achieve its hope for soft landing, in which inflation continues falling to its 2% target, while the economy grows and unemployment rate, currently at 3.7, remains low.
Can you break that down for us? Because there's a lot of fancy wordage in there.
So it's good PR is what they're trying to do, because they never want to spook the market into thinking that there is any kind of recession risk. This whole idea of a soft landing is something that historically they have tried to accomplish over the last 100 years as this problem continually persists over and over and over again, right? So every single time there's a crash, 1929, 1987, 2000.com, 2008, when I'm predicting 2025 due to all this mature commercial real estate debt coming due, it's always driven by a couple major things: cheap money and banks being over leveraged every single time. There's no other way around it. It might come out in different shapes or form, whether it's residential mortgages like we saw in 2008, where, you know, they were giving out these ARM loans, which had fluctuating interest rates. And that was a big problem.
Yeah.
And pretty much anybody with a pulse could get a loan. Whether it was the savings and loan crisis in 1987, which is essentially they locked in savings rates, but then simultaneously increased rates from 10% to 20%. So if you were in a savings account at maybe 5.5%, you wouldn't really want to keep your money there. You would probably try to deploy it somewhere else. So there was a bank run. Effectively, none of these banks were solvent, which was the issue. 1929, similar kind of issue, overvalued businesses, over leveraged banks, market collapses. There's a run on the banks, a run on capital, and nobody's solvent anymore. So it happens over and over and over again. But what we're doing today is unprecedented. So if you look back in 1987, when Alan Greenspan was the Fed chairman at that point in time, interest rates were at like 10% and we took them to 20%. So sounds like a big number, but most people are really bad at math. 10% to 20% is only a 2x increase. We're only doubling what we're doing. What we did from 2020 to date is we went from effectively zero, we'll call it 0.25 because it kind of fluctuated in there, to 5.5%. That's a 22x increase. And so the problem now that exists for all of these banks is they wrote loans on commercial real estate that is now going to come due, and those properties are materially lower. Call it 10, 15, $20 million. So if you have a maturity date and a balloon payment and you're supposed to refinance or sell that property, one, you're going to have to sell it at a loss. Two, you can't refinance it because you're upside down on the property, right? And so how are we going to navigate that, right? The only way to really get it done is to drop the interest rates, but then that exacerbates the problem all over again that we're already in. And so this idea of a soft landing is something that's kind of crazy. So, but before we go too deep, I want to watch Fed Chair Powell's actual comments so you guys can hear it for yourself.
Discuss the compound risks identified in commercial real estate lending, particularly at banks with large CRE concentrations and high fractions of uninsured deposits.
Sure. Let me see. I think there are just very, very few transactions in commercial real estate right now, particularly in the troubled areas. So it's not a question of prices still falling. It's a question that you don't have the kind of price discovery. You just have to assume that the prices are very low and have come down a lot. So on commercial real estate, we have a secular change in people working from home. This is one big part of it. That means that in many cities, the downtown office district is very underpopulated. There are empty buildings in many major and minor cities. It also means that all the retail that was there to service the thousands and thousands of people who work in those buildings, they're under pressure too. And banks will have made loans to.
So the part that he doesn't say is people are moving out of the city. Right. It's not just about work from home. It's the fact that living in city centers sucks. And so why would I live in a city center where it sucks, where there's crime, drugs, homelessness? This is every major city across the country. I mean, we're in Denver, which used to be considered clean, right? That place sucks now.
Bro, I was there recently. Dude just pulled out his weenie and started using the bathroom.
Stop.
I'm eating food. My guy just right next to the restaurant.
Unbelievable.
I'm like, bruh.
So you keep going.
So this we've known for some years. And so what do? We have identified the banks that have high commercial real estate concentrations, particularly office and retail, and other ones that have been affected a lot. We identify them, and we are in dialogue with them around, do you have your arms around this problem? Do you have enough capital? Do you have enough liquidity? Do you have a plan? You're going to take losses here. Are you being truthful with yourself and with your owners? And so we've been working with them. And so for some time we've been doing that. And this is a problem that we'll be working on for years more, I'm sure. There will be bank failures, but this is not the big banks. If you look at the very big banks, it's not a first order issue for any of the very large banks. It's more, smaller and medium-sized banks that have these issues.
Stop right there.
We're working with.
So he said it. He said the quiet part out loud.
There will be
bank failures, right? We've already had 5, Silicon Valley Bank being the first one. So there is more to come. There is an opportunity for you, if you are an entrepreneur, to be able to take advantage of what's coming in the future. Now, this idea of a soft landing is a farce. It's never happened before. They've never been able to control.
When they say soft landing, what are they framing?
They're imagining these two little toggles, which is this idea of keeping consumer spending up, keeping employment up while simultaneously adjusting the interest rates and then letting the market settle. Because it's when they make the first adjustment, which was pretty aggressive, right? They increased rates pretty exponentially when they first started moving the rate needle. The market will hyperbolic correct, right? So we're starting to see that now. I think cap rates like in Dallas and Fort Worth, if we're talking about real estate, for example, I know that market pretty well. The cap rates were like 4% going into 2020. And then coming out of that, today they're like 5 3/4. That's a material decompression of cap rates, which means things just got a lot less valuable. for those of you who weren't alive or paying attention or had your head in the sand, I was fortunate enough to get baptized in the deep end of the pool. There's a guy who I follow for a really long time, and his name is Peter Schiff. And Peter Schiff is what I would call an Austrian economist. He's a big fan of laissez-faire, small government, and he's constantly advocating against everything that the Fed is doing because he knows long tail that it leads to the same thing. That's why it happened in 1929, 1987, 2000, 2008, and it'll probably happen again in 2025. He had a video that we're going to play for you guys. And this is really a highlight reel. So we'll only watch a little bit. It's 9 minutes and 59 seconds, almost 10 minutes. But he basically would go on every major news channel and he would effectively tell them that the housing market is built on absolutely nothing. It's going to collapse. Get out now while you can. And he got laughed off of every single station until, of course, it happened. It actually happened. And so this is where we're at today is there's all this PR going around by the major mainstream media, which is all controlled by the same people who are issuing this bad ideology, and they're trying to convince you otherwise. So this is just going to be a little reminder that don't believe everything you see on TV.
Recession or not, we're going to be joined by Art Laffer. He's Chief Investment Officer of Laffer Investments and former economic advisor to President Reagan. And Peter Schiff, he's president of Euro Pacific Capital. Gentlemen, thanks for being here. Peter, I want to start with you. Although there are more and more people saying that the U.S. economy will be in a recession next year, it is still a minority position. Why do you think that a recession is coming? Just
Sounds
how bad
familiar,
is it going
right?
to be?
I think it's going to be pretty bad, and whether it starts in 07 or 8, I think is immaterial. And I also think it's going to last not just for quarters, but for years. See, the basic problem with the U.S. economy is we have too much consumption and borrowing and not enough production and savings. And what's going to happen is the American consumer is basically going to stop consuming and start rebuilding his savings, especially when he sees his home equity evaporate. And when you have the economy 70% consumption, you can't address those imbalances without a recession. Rather than the recession being resisted, it should really be embraced, because the disease is all this debt-financed consumption. The cure is that we stop consuming and start saving and producing again, and that's a recession. And sometimes, medicine tastes bad, but you got to swallow it.
Art
Pause it right
Laffer,
there.
you hear him? He says
So the argument today is like people have more in savings, their home equity is worth more, yada, yada, yada. The challenge there is equity in your home is paper money. So it's not real until you can extract it. So how would you extract it? You would extract it by refinancing and effectively doubling or tripling your interest rate, which would bring your mortgage payment up maybe from $3,000 to $6,000, or get a home equity line of credit, also driven by the interest rate environment. So who in their right mind is actually going to do it? So it's trapped equity that's not usable. Right. And so that means nothing to anybody. So great. My home is worth a lot more and I can't tap it. That means nothing. The other thing that they're not talking about right now is the fact that all these major organizations just laid off 85,000 people last week, right? They all wait until after the first of the year to do it because they don't want to hit their stock price, right? So now they let them off in the first quarter. And so the employment curve is changing quite a bit as well. But everything they're saying right now, it sounds pretty similar to what we're talking about right now. So I don't know how many times we can continually do the same thing and expect a different result, right? The only reason it happens is because people, not you guys listening to this or watching this on YouTube, it's people who put their head in the sand and they don't actually pay attention to what has happened in the past, the history of what has happened with our economy in this Keynesian economic environment. And so we're not going to cover this, but I'm going to put it in the show notes, which is, you can pull it up real quick just so everybody can get pop eyes on it. But it's this next document, which is the federal fund rates history. I would encourage you guys to go and read through this document so you can actually have an understanding of what has happened with interest rates over the last 30 years, right? And it's going to be very telling about where interest rates are today versus where they have been historically and what that actually means as it relates to what's going to happen next, how this is going to unfold. Because if they do lower interest rates, you're going to see another frenzy in the housing market. But we're not, as a country, we're not producing anything. We're not making anything better. And so what Peter Schiff said in that video is the truth, is the only way to fix the problem is to just let the free market do what it needs to do, which is fall apart.
You must reap what you sow, right?
Correct. It's biblical.
It's absolutely biblical. It's all over the place. I think the one thing that I think about when I listen to him and is this word production. I think when we hear the word, productivity, content is a trending thing online. But what does it mean for a nation to be productive, for citizens to be productive, to have a productive economy?
Well, I mean, I'll tell you straight up. I mean, if you just look at the end of World War II, Europe was in shambles. And so the United States at that point had the largest navy and military in the world. And they effectively said, hey, we're going to guard the waterways. And in order for you guys to rebuild, we're going to consume your goods.
Right.
And in exchange for us doing that, you're going to help us fight against the Red Army, Russia, who's now trying to infiltrate Europe in its weakness and try to take territory effectively. And so we did that, and we became a consumer economy. And for the last, call it going on 80 years, we haven't actually been a producer economy. Now that's shifting, right? We're now a net producer of oil and gas. We are now moving manufacturing and things like that used to be overseas back stateside. We have more oil and gas in Saudi Arabia. We have more farmland, right? We have one of the greatest economically sovereign countries in the world. We don't actually need anybody. And prior to World War II, we didn't really participate. So we're going back that way, and that'll ultimately be what's going to save us. But we got to go through some dark times first. And we got to realize that the way that we've done it sucks.
Yeah, the way that we've done it sucks. And many of the ideas that are on the table suck.
Correct.
And honestly, I think that's a good transition to what we're going to speak about next, which is Worldcoin.
Yeah, Sam Altman.
Sam Altman and Worldcoin. Well,
he's been a hot topic lately on this pod.
He's on a roll. Between him and Elon, these new engineer entrepreneurs are they're on a roll here. It's almost like a comic book in some ways. I feel like it's like
sometimes I feel like with Sam Altman and what we're talking about today, that he's like more focused on the mission to install AI and computer into the ecosystem and not really taking a lot of time to sit back and think about the
long term,
the moral consequence of doing such things like that. So,
so Financial Times put on an article, Spain blocks Sam Altman's eye-scanning venture, Worldcoin.
Worldcoin, i.e. a one world
He didn't
currency.
say USA coin.
He said a Worldcoin, one world currency coin.
Well, I'm going to kick off just a little bit of this article that's highlighted. Spain has moved to block Altman's cryptocurrency project, Worldcoin, the latest blow to a venture that has raised controversy in multiple countries by collecting customers' personal data using an eye-scanning orb. The AEPD, Spain's data protection regulator, has demanded that Worldcoin immediately cease collecting personal information in the country via the scans and that it stops using the data it has already gathered. The regulator announced on Wednesday that it has taken the precautionary measure at the start of the week and has given Worldcoin 72 hours to demonstrate its compliance with the order. Mar España Marte, AEPD director, said Spain was the first European nation to move against Worldcoin and that it was impelled by special concern that the company was collecting information about minors. Take note of that. What we have done is raise the alarm in Europe, but this is an issue that affects citizens in all countries of the European nation and obviously other nations. That means there has to be a coordinated action. Just for starters, Worldcoin was co-founded in 2019. And really the incentive behind it for people to participate in this is that they're offering tokens or a cryptocurrency, a Worldcoin of its own, to people in return for their consent to have their eye scanned by this orb, the biometric information, in exchange for cryptocurrency. So
sounds like a mark.
And lastly, we'll stop with this. The scans are used as a form of identification as they seek to create a reliable mechanism to distinguish between humans and machines as artificial intelligence becomes more advanced.
Whew, that's heavy.
How do we get here? How is this even possible?
I mean, I think it's first possible because we live in a world where countries have moved to fiat currency, where it's a currency backed by nothing. And so because it's backed by nothing, it doesn't really hold any value. And so I was going to talk about this a little bit later, but I think it's more relevant to talk about it now, which is this idea of, I can always say it wrong. I want to say Gresham's law. Yeah, Gresham's law. Gresham's law, which is this concept that bad money pushes out good money. And some people say it the other way, but good money pushes out bad money. It's bad money pushes out good money, which effectively means that when you have a fiat currency circulating, people will use that to transact. And then the good money leaves the ecosystem, the gold, the Bitcoin, the real estate, the things that hold that intrinsic value. Those things don't trade hands, right? People just kind of hold on to those because it's the only place they can store value because they don't have any value in like the US dollar, for example. So that's happened everywhere. It's happened in the European Union, right? And so something like the Worldcoin is attractive because it's like, well, now look, I can travel anywhere. I can use this currency. I don't have to deal with exchange rates or anything like that. It's acceptable. But the drawback to that is what?
I mean, no sovereignty.
Yeah, correct. So why would a country want to maintain its sovereignty?
Well, I mean, this is part of a bigger discussion, but a country that is not sovereign is not a country at all.
Correct. Right. And so, there's, the IMF, the Economic World Forum, they're all trying to work towards this one world ideology. But the trouble with that is, we can't even if you look at American ideals and the way that this country was founded, it's like we were moving away from this idea of a king. So if there is one small group of people that controls everything, and it's pretty clear that the reason that major governments have moved towards printing money is because they can ultimately, if you control the flow of money, you control the people.
Absolutely.
Imagine that just at a global scale. Right. I don't see that being better. I see that being draconian and worse for us.
Very much so. Very much
so, more specifically, if you're an American and you're an American entrepreneur and this idea of freedom and independence, which is ultimately everything that we're chasing, I'm going to read this to you. This is from the Heritage Foundation. It says, why does sovereignty matter to America? The United States is a sovereign nation. Sovereignty is a simple idea. The United States is an independent nation governed by the people that controls its own affairs. We're a constitutional republic, democratic republic. The American people adopted the Constitution and created the government.
Correct.
They elect their representatives and make their own laws. The founding fathers understood that if America does not have sovereignty, it does not have independence. If a foreign power can tell America what we shall do and what we shall not do, George Washington once wrote to Alexander Hamilton, we have independence yet to seek and have contended hitherto for very little. So the point is, if you enjoy your freedom in this beautiful country that we live in, the idea of a one world currency should actually really bother you. And more importantly, the fact that we have a dollar backed by nothing and we have adopted this Keynesian economic ideology here in the United States, and we keep repeating these same cycles over and over again, and we're doing the same thing and expecting a different result, that should start to irritate you.
Yeah, dude, when we're talking about these topics and we're talking about money, I think one of the things that I've observed over the last several years is just that we struggle to distill things down to really simple analogies and illustrations that we can understand the implications, but in light of those things. And for example, it's like you have money that's not backed by anything, right? So, okay. And we talked about this where the way we spend money as a nation is the equivalent of having a family and you're taking your family's resources and you're using them every which way possible except for on your family. But yet you're coming home and you're telling your family, like, I'm doing a great job. I'm doing a great job. We're going to be okay. In fact, this is really good, and it's our ability to boil down these things to understand what's actually happening. Because if you think about it, we clearly don't have a really sound understanding of what money is as a nation. I would say that.
Yeah. We did that video going around talking to college kids of what is money. Nobody could clearly define what money was.
Yeah. And so it's really imperative that as entrepreneurs, as employees, as in our friend groups, we begin to have really simple conversations about, like, what are the implications of these things? What what is actually happening around us. And even to that point of what you just said with the founding fathers, you should be very concerned when Sam Altman, who's not an elected official, he is an entrepreneur. And if you look at the Declaration, he has not been consented to have any form of power over you. And so it's really significant that business people, other fellow entrepreneurs, are making the kind of moves that put them in positions of being in power over citizens on a national and global scale without consent.
Correct.
That is very troubling, and it's going to continue to happen until we continue to make podcasts like this. We continue to have conversations, and we stop saying things like, keep religion and politics out of this.
Right.
And no, you better bring it back to the lunch table fast.
Correct. And the bigger issue with most cryptocurrencies, not Bitcoin, because it's not a cryptocurrency, is the fact that it's the same problem it's a wolf in sheep's clothing. Right. It's centralized currency controlled by a small segment of people, like Ethereum is a prime example. That's ultimately controlled by a centralized body that can change the way the code forks at any point in time,
100%.
However they want. It's the same thing with ADA, right? Cardano. And so Bitcoin is the only one that's truly decentralized, and that the value is kind of predetermined, and it would take 90% consensus from a decentralized market. I mean, we can't even agree on who would be a president, right? Yeah. To get that to pivot and change. And so it makes a case for Bitcoin as a store of value, and starting to look at everything you do kind of backed by how much Bitcoin you have. Gold would be another store of value. It's one of the oldest. It's God's money. It is continued to store its value historically. It's not very easily traded, but gold still does carry value, because right now, if you're just sitting in cash, you have dollars controlled by nothing that are getting destroyed, or backed by nothing that are getting destroyed by inflation.
Dude, this is so wild, dude. When you think about if you have $1 or you have a car or anything that's you consider to be of value, the only reason that it's valuable to you is because there's elements of scarcity within it. Like the second I have 47 cars, my one car is not that valuable anymore unless it's the one that my grandfather gave me that I know I can't get back. And so it's just it's so appalling to see the level of disregard that we're wrestling with, and just
I think it's just a lack for wanting to do the work to study the history and see how it's played out. You know what I mean? So that's part of it. This is also just another case for why it's valuable to be an entrepreneur, right? Because you can accept whatever bad money, right? We can accept dollars, and we can parlay the money that we make and the profit that we make into good money, right? Buy more Bitcoin, buy more gold, buy more real estate, buy more assets, and so being rich in assets and poor in physical cash is actually a really good thing. And if you're an entrepreneur and you have an exchange medium, i.e. a business where I provide a good or a product or a service or something like that, and you pay me for it, then I should be thinking about how to parlay that into other things to stabilize my balance sheet long term.
Yeah, and just thinking about scarcity, what's more scarce than your actual personal identification, your life, right? In exchange for a currency, a cryptocurrency that can easily be inflated. The population the supply can easily be regulated and everything else.
Well, and the younger generation just doesn't value it as much, is because they grew up during a time when, currency is effectively worth nothing.
Right.
And so to them, they don't really understand money. They don't understand value, store value, having a currency backed by gold, which is not a concept that they've ever known.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, man. I mean, yeah. Well, Sam Altman is also. The dude is on a roll.
He's got his hands in everything, and we're ultimately trying to deduce what his ultimate game plan is here. I don't fully understand it quite yet, but between AI, one world currency, and then what he's getting ready to do with Reddit, which is the Reddit IPO, not only does it seem crazy the valuation that they're giving this thing, but he has some plans, I'm sure, to leverage that with AI in order to bring it to life. So I'll let you break it down for us.
Roger that. Well, this article comes by way of TechCrunch. Headline reads, Reddit's planned IPO share price seems high, unless you look at its AI revenue. And shout out to Cole C-Rock in the background who brought this on the radar. Reddit's IPO plans are coming into focus with a new S-1 filing released Monday morning that sets the initial price range for its stock at $31 to $34 per share. If investors agree to pay its high-end range, its valuation should hit around $5.4 billion. At the low end of this range, $31 billion. Though Reddit would be worth 4.93 based on expected 158 million shares outstanding. Others have circulated a potential valuation of closer to over 6 billion mark by including options held by employees and others. In any case, everyone seems to believe it will emerge as a company at or above the $5 billion mark, something of a Mendoza line for Reddit, given the clues of its secondary market trading activity showed on pricing prior to its IPO filings. Key point here, with $804 million in 2023 revenue, Reddit is on track to trade for a multiple of 6.9x to 8x its revenue, depending on the valuation estimate you want to use. Given that Reddit is an unprofitable, long-established social media company and one that depends on advertising that feels a tad expensive, unprofitable Snap, for example, is currently worth 4.34x with its revenues highly profitable. Meta is worth 9.86x with its own trailing revenues. Reddit's game plan for AI is one good reason why it's pricing its shares closer to Meta than Snap. So really the secret linchpin is that AI piece that's really given the investing value. Reddit sold $203 million worth of contracts to AI companies for access to its data earlier this year. And just with a quote from the company, "We are in the early stage of monetizing our emerging opportunity in data licensing by allowing third parties to access, search, and analyze data on our platform." I wonder how the users feel about this. In January 2024, we entered into certain data license arrangements with an aggregate contract value of $203 million in terms ranging from 2 to 3 years. We expect a minimum of $66 million of revenue to be recognized during the year ending December 31st, 2024, and the remaining thereafter. Last but not least, while this didn't reveal the buyer in such contracts, OpenAI CEO Sam Altman holds an 8.7% stake in Reddit, making him the third largest shareholder. He was also once a member of the company's board of directors. The article continues on with more about it, but that's more than enough to cover really the nuts and bolts of what we're looking at here with a company going IPOing, but also having this real negative value here on the AI side that's beginning to lean on heavily.
AI, and they have 70 million daily active users, 850 million users who use it once a month. So 70 million are using it daily, 850 million that are coming in at least once a month. They get about 30 billion views every month. That was 2020.
Yeah.
So I think that the topic at hand, or what we should be talking about as it relates to this, is in and around this data licensing idea.
Yeah.
Who does that data belong to? So we're, according to we'll call it Web 2.0, which is how Google and Amazon and Reddit and Snap and Meta and all them were built, the data belongs to the company. Centralized, right?
Right.
And so this begs the question of, as we move into a more AI-driven type of world, should that data belong to the company or should it belong to me? Because I don't want my personal information or thoughts necessarily being, put into the machine per se, and then them selling that data and using it however they want.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I think it goes back though to like you're using their product though. It's like the equivalent of coming over to their house.
It is. I mean, I guess to a certain extent. And so this is kind of what the push for, call it Web 3.0, is really kind of leaning towards, which is this idea of decentralization and ownership over your own data.
Right. Well, let me ask then, what might be the long-term implications of, such a strategy in terms of using data with its community? That would be the question I think is.
I mean, I bet there's something to be learned from that data. I mean, it's right up there with a search engine like Google. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I don't ultimately know what the implications. Who learned you how to spoke? I don't know what the implications are of that, but I could imagine that information would be valuable and useful in informing their algorithm to parse data, make decisions. Do you guys see this being a trend? I think it has to be, right? I mean, it is the direction that most. It is the next hot thing, right? It is like revolutionizing. It's why we talk about AI so much. It's why we're trying to embrace it as much as we possibly can, because it is the pivot and it is where the market's going. And still don't feel like I know enough about it.
Yeah.
And I feel like I'm more competent than most, but
I do think it would be a trend just because the value is in the data. And so if my competitor is going to obviously get a leg up, have an advantage, be able to create a better product, have a better relationship with consumers by way of leveraging the data, albeit through AI, and I'm not, then I'm basically saying I don't want to be in business, or I don't want to stay around in this manner that I currently am in.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, software is innately better at solving problems and equations than we are as human beings because it can do it rapidly and perfectly. So that is definitely going to be a trend. I think too, if you just look at like the challenges that come along with, let's just say, running advertisement on Facebook. If you don't understand all the bells and the whistles of how it works and how to build a custom audience and, what your impression share looks like versus your click through and how to really identify where the breakdowns are, then you're not getting the most out of the platform. And if you don't actually see the result, what do? You leave, right?
Right.
And so if they can remove that need for people to know that stuff or have to look out agencies, they won't need agencies anymore, and the equations and the algorithms could solve themselves and inform better data and more personalized marketing to users, then that makes their platform better. Yeah, for sure. I think they're going to embrace it.
And how are these companies getting away with valuing themselves so much higher?
I mean, it's eyeballs, man. Who owns 850 million users a month? I mean,
right.
Most of the television channels can't even say that.
Correct.
So it's kind of interesting timing because up until, call it the last couple of years, that's how most businesses were valued, right? You didn't even have to make money. You just had to grow your user base. You had to do more revenue each and every year, whether it was profitable or not. I mean, Amazon's never turned a profit. Look how big they are, right? It's because they were constantly reinvesting that capital back into the business. So
are those companies expected to make a profit at some point, or they're not?
I think if you're new to the market today and you're trying to raise money or go public, yes, you're expected to be profitable. But if you have, that many users and that much data and you've been around for that long, you're writing a different, you're playing with a different sheet music than everybody else.
You're navigating different waters. Yeah,
correct.
100%. Yeah. Your boat's different.
It seems crazy though, but advertising doing $850 million a year, so almost $1 billion a year in revenue is nothing to scoff at.
Correct. I think the one piece we talk about long-term implications, which is just coming on the back of what we were previously discussing, which is, the consumer, in order to sort of be a mainstream consumer, you're almost faced with a choice of, do I want to continue to play ball in this way?
Right.
So do I want to continue? Okay, maybe I'm not signing up for Worldcoin, but I'm going to actually have my data on this platform being used by the very people instituting this thing. And so it's almost like we're inevitably heading for this breaking point of people who want to be a part of the centralized machine and then those who want to live in a decentralized manner. And it's almost equivalent to like things we've seen in stories and books and Hunger Games kind of stuff where there's like sub-levels of communities where they're still functioning, but their way of life is different because they're not a part of the machine. They didn't buy in or whatever it is. And I just get that sense when I'm reading this kind of stuff where I'm like, oh, we're talking about Worldcoin. And without being a theorist of any kind, it just seems inevitable when you're reaping what you're sowing. these things can't really exist entirely in the same space, you know?
It can't, but the government will continue to use those things to confuse its people because they'll talk about a digital currency, right? But the point of like a cryptocurrency is to be able to operate outside the system,
Right.
like in a decentralized fashion. I don't need the US dollar to do a transaction with you if
Right.
you and I both agree that
Correct.
X, Y, and Z currency has value. And that's why they don't like that, right? And why they try to put rules and regulations around your ability to like create currencies and whatnot. So I think we're just going to be moving to that direction. But I had Cole pull up this chart for everybody, this Web 2.0 versus Web 3.0, which is kind of piggybacking off of what you just said. So in the current, we'll call it centralized web, right? Everything runs off of fiat currency, right? We want to buy a product, we use dollars essentially to do it. Cookie tracking, right? Which is the ability to track every single user. Web 2.0 is divided by layout technologies that provide more dynamic control than Web 1.0, CSS and AJAX. You have relational databases. So that kind of like the user base, right? And all the information about them. And then using that information to run ads or target or do whatever it might be in social networks. In Web 3.0, everything's decentralized. So it's peer-to-peer. There's no middleman effectively running it. It runs off of cryptocurrency, runs off of non-fungible tokens, NFTs, and it uses AI because it's smarter, autonomous, right? Includes machine learning. Runs off the blockchain, which is actually making it more secure.
Right.
So we can do a transaction, but this idea of doing it anonymously is not really a thing anymore, which is actually better if you're truly trying to crack down on money laundering and trafficking.
All the things they try to scare us with.
Correct.
Yeah.
And then obviously this idea of, the metaverse. Instead of social network, this more like immersive experience in how we engage and whatnot. So that seems kind of far off, but I'm sure that seemed the same way, in 1983 when the internet was born.
Well, who would have imagined an Apple Vision Pro 25 years ago, right?
Correct.
Like,
it is operational now, right?
It's
It's like this integration of technology and the web and everyday life.
Right. Yeah, something that I think about when I think about the internet, the internet was, it was actually supposed to be it had a decentralization component at its core to make sure that our military wasn't dependent on one central place and stuck. And then you just look at the way it was configured to serve purpose for knowledge transfer and all these different things. And you just see that Web 3.0 makes sense. Bitcoin makes sense that these things would be inevitable by way of the internet.
The internet has created the network effect, right? So, everybody thinks of like data and servers. They just think about, big warehouses stored full of servers, but they don't realize that there are what are called proxy servers that allow us to use millions and millions upon millions of computers in order to transact and do things in a more discrete way on the web because of the network.
Correct. Well, dude, I think, one of the things we saw in the news yesterday was Dr. Jordan Peterson testifying on Congress about these similar topics,
Putting a bow on all three of these things.
Yeah,
we just talked about.
facial recognition, government collusion with businesses and
Businesses and banks.
Yeah, business and banks. And so, oh, dude, that's like the best ad of the year right there.
Can we pause for a second and just...
You could chip in $5, $10, or even $25. I know that times could be tough, and they are tough under this horrible president that we have, Joe Biden. So if you can't contribute now, don't even...
Well, let's put a bow on top of this. As you said that, I like that. Let's put a bow on top of the things we've been discussing with a clip from Jordan Peterson, Dr. Jordan Peterson, or Dr. Jordan B. Peterson, depending on how you consume his content. But he's sitting on the Capitol here in the States, being obviously a citizen of Canada, testifying about the potential ills of government collusion with businesses and banks, and even getting into things like facial recognition technology. And so let's play the clip and just chew on what he has to say for us.
Dr. Peterson, why are you such a Luddite? Why don't you embrace artificial intelligence and
Real quick,
facial
pause it.
recognition?
For those of you who don't know what a Luddite is, a Luddite was during the time of the manufacturing era or boom, the Luddites were anti-manufacturing because they thought it would steal all these jobs. And he's being funny, but that's actually not what Jordan Peterson's getting at. He's not worried about people's jobs getting taken away.
And massive computer surveillance and cameras on every street corner so that we could all be safer.
Because there's tremendous danger and too much security. If the emerging collusion between government and corporation, gigantic corporation, continues in the manner that it is continuing, there won't be anything that you do that can't be used against you and will be used against you in very short order. And the concerns that are expressed here about the local consequences of that, let's say with regards to January 6th, seem to me to fail to take into account the much broader threat that lurks underneath that everyone should be attending to. We're in danger of eliminating the private sphere entirely. That's already happening in places around the world, particularly in China, which is why I made reference to that. That technology is at hand. And it appears as though both giant governments and giant corporations are utilizing it in every way that they can manage. And it's often motivated by the claim that that's forestalling an immediate proximal threat, right? Well, that's a short-term justification for engaging in a tremendous long-term danger. And it should be perceived as dangerous to those on the left who are politically committed, because it will be the politically committed who are first identified by such systems.
Is it true that you have a PhD?
Pause it there, brother.
Yes.
Yeah, he's warning of the risks of if we go down this route, we can't go back. And I wanted to talk about this earlier today. Cole actually just slacked you this idea, but this is all kind of stems from this idea of Keynesian economics versus Austrian economics, right? So for those of you who don't know what Keynesian economics is, it's this idea that markets are inefficient and that they need to be regulated. And if you print money and you throw money at the top, it trickles down and helps regulate the inefficiency. Austrian economics essentially says that markets are supposed to be inefficient, and when they become inefficient, the market will correct itself, right? It's this idea of laissez-faire or small government. And so it's always funny to me that like left-leaning people are pro Keynesian economics, they're pro big government, they're pro this that we're hearing, and people who are more conservative-leaning tend to be, hey, power to the people, small government, laissez-faire, stay out of my business, let the free markets do what the free markets will. Mm-hmm. Kind of in the middle of all this, there's this idea that capitalism gets a bad rap. And it does, because what we're currently operating in, or at least what you hear about, is we're operating in crony capitalism, which is the big companies, the elitists, the ones that have the most control and power are the ones that generally benefit the most, right? And have the most influence over political parties. And so, do you really care at the end of the day what happens to the peasants if you're, sitting at the top of the ivory tower with the rest of the people making the laws? Probably not. It doesn't really affect you, right? And so what Jordan Peterson's getting at is like, hey, here's the risks of what happens if we go down this route. And truly what we've been talking about this whole time about independence and freedom and losing our ideology as American citizens of like everything that this country was founded on. Like that should really bother you, because the reason you get to live the life that you live and operate the way that you do is because you have those freedoms. But imagine a place like China, where if you spoke out against the government, that they just rounded you up and threw you in jail. Right. And so this is a step in that direction. When the federal government says they're going to roll out a centralized digital currency, you should be terrified, because now it becomes attached to a credit score. I don't know if you guys know this, but there's 700 million cameras throughout China that are already installing this social credit system that are tracking your every move. They can track your gait. They can track your facial expressions,
It's already
your
here in the
eyes,
States.
etc.
We're already doing it in certain spots, airports, some airports. It's funny. I'm gonna backtrack and just say, in this clip with Jordan Peterson, I try to listen for just key things that he says, just because he's such an intellectual, and he strings together his words in a very potent way. But the one thing he said is there's great danger in too much security. And that piece is the part that strikes me about this and everything we're looking at. It's this constant notion, this utopian kind of ideology that we need a world where no one gets their feelings hurt. We need a world where people don't die. They don't die young. They don't get sick. Injustice doesn't happen. Bad things don't happen. Crimes aren't committed. And when that's the ideal, that's really what is playing out in a lot of these measures. We want a world where everyone is under the thumb, but that gives us the chance to make sure that nothing bad ever happens.
Right.
Well, that's the exact environment where something bad always will happen, because the limits that you'll go to obtain that, when that becomes the vision, just look at China, look at Mao, look at Stalin, look at Hitler. Like there's so many examples throughout history of when perfection, when there's only one perfect one, becomes the goal, what we will do.
Yeah, any defectors be removed.
100%. And so just the notion of the great danger in too much security. Risk and mistakes.
Yeah, too much security means no freedom.
And risk and mistakes, the potential for bad things happening, all of these things are what make, they are part of what makes being made in God's image such a beautiful thing, and being on this planet. It's part of actually what makes this country so beautiful. Beauty is beauty, I guess the way I was going back to the economic piece about supply and demand, right?
Yeah.
Like you will only fully know and appreciate beauty, the good, the true, when you see the result of ugly, of wickedness, of evil, of lies. And so you can't even really appreciate it if you don't understand the potential of the reality of the opposite of that. And so it's a futile pursuit,
And the bad people are always going to operate outside that system. Even in one of the most secure environments possible, a prison, where everything's on lockdown, everything's under quote unquote control,
right.
There's still defectors who don't operate in that system, right? Making shanks, killing people, doing bad stuff.
And on the opposite, there's still code within the prison.
Correct.
What happens to the person who's a child molester when they get to prison?
Yeah.
Right?
Doesn't end well for them.
Yeah, and so you have to have both. And so this world where we're going to have all of this this was a note that I made as we close on this, which is in the last 20 some odd years, I'm just going to say the last 20 some odd years, because that's when I've been living in this world and as an adult functioning in society. The consumer doesn't have to think. It's this constant pursuit of don't think about it. Don't think. Get your click now. Do this. Get it fast. Get it here. Comfort. Don't, bring the game to your forefront. You don't ever have to click a button to turn it on. Like it's just this constant thing of you don't have to think about being a consumer. Just enjoy the comfort. But if you live in a world where you don't have to think, well what kind of world is that going to be? It's going to be the world that you didn't think about happening.
Exactly.
It's going to be the world that you didn't think about. And that is not going to be a world that you want to be a part of. I promise you that.
100%. Which is a great segue to our next topic. Did you see what's going on in Pittsburgh?
Did I?
It's literally the Purge.
The Purge.
In real life. There was some commentary that came out from the police department specifically talking about how, due to our wonderful idea that we're going to go and get rid of the police, or at least reduce the number of them, that they are now overwhelmed. And so they're going to have to make some adjustments to prioritize certain calls over other calls. Mm-hmm. We're going to watch this.
Well, before we watch it, I just want to give a shout out to Libs of TikTok. These
guys are,
I want to say these guys, but I know it's the girl. I don't know what their staff and their team of people, but they are always on it. And so shout out to Libs of TikTok.
Rick, what was the big takeaway today?
Yeah, Susan, residents of the city will see a major change in the way police respond. They will no longer respond to calls that aren't considered in-progress emergency. That means calls like criminal mischief, theft, harassment, and most burglary alarms will all be handled by an enhanced telephone reporting unit. That means residents will file a police report over the phone. Officers will not respond unless it's an emergency. Also, between the hours of 3 a.m. and 7 a.m., there will be no officers at any of the 6 stations throughout the city. Call boxes that link directly to 911 have been installed for people to use in case of an emergency. And during the overnight shift, there will be as few as 20 officers to cover the entire city. The chief said today the data supports that.
We're not talking about Mobile,
yes,
Alabama.
it's enough to cover the entire city in those hours when we have 8% of the time people are calling. I'm confident in the decisions that we make that it impacts this bureau and the city in a much better way than we have in the past.
Now, the chief also acknowledging today that some of these changes are due to staffing shortages. He's down to 740 officers, well below the 850 they would like to have. Now, coming up new at 5, residents, city council, and the police union all weighing in on these big changes that begin Monday. Live in the studio, Rick Earl, Channel 11 News.
Bro, time out. Just for the record, we're talking about Pittsburgh. We're not talking about
major city,
a town I used to live in, like Farmington, Minnesota. We're talking about
that is a tiny little town, by the way.
Yeah, I love it, dude. Farmington. We're talking about Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and also I'll give credit to In Wokeness because they were the ones originally sourcing it. But
there's 2.3 million people in the MSA, the Metropolitan Statistical Area, which is basically downtown and greater downtown.
And we said 20 officers? Is that what he said? 20 officers?
No, 20 officers on staff. Yeah, they have 750 or something out of the 850 that they want. That was what I think was what he said. But this is what always gets me. It's like, why would I ever need a gun? Right? This is why you need a gun. Because when somebody breaks in at 3 a.m., that's not an emergency.
Yeah.
It is an emergency if you're coming into my house.
It definitely is.
It's what I love the Colorado make my day law.
Dude, look at this. So knowing this was, immediately when I got news of this, I just wanted to say, how did we get here? Well, a little article from WPXI, which is a Pennsylvania news reporting publication, July 28th, 2020. The Pittsburgh City Council passes 5 bills at reforming some of the practices of the Pittsburgh Bureau of the Police. The bills include 1, a hiring freeze. 2, demilitarization of police. 3, establishing a duty to intervene requires all police officers to step in and stop other officers from using illegal or unnecessary force. Stop the Violence Fund. Instead of funding the police, requires the city to dedicate 10% of budget annually for evidence-based violence prevention social services programs. Then 5, banning chokeholds. Ban chokeholds from being used by officers. The point there, this started years ago. You reap what you sow. This is the point. It's like this started years ago. This was 2020 when the city council started bringing these bills. And you wonder why a guy can't fill spots? He can't meet his quota?
Yeah, why would you want to go be a police officer there? Right. No, thanks. I'm good.
And then you got people aging out of the force too. Like you reap what you sow.
Yeah, I have a buddy who was a police officer in Los Angeles County. He very strategically moved to Raleigh, North Carolina to be a police officer because he didn't want any part of Los Angeles police officer politics, right? And it's just an unsafe place to be. So, it has started. It's an interesting experiment. Right. We're going to see how it plays out. But very quickly, I think we see crime rates go through the roof.
Well, and this is the thing that we've consistently seen is these cities that were like, oh, we're going to be sanctuary, or we're going to defund. When the rubber meets the road and the things that you call to happen and invite and say you want to promote start to happen, the course always turns around. The tune always changes. And, whether it's New York saying, we're a sanctuary city. Okay, well, the second you start getting people shipped to your city and sent from other states, Now we got a problem. Now we're blaming the federal government because they're not helping. Or the second we start defunding police on the West Coast and doing all these things, now we got institutions, we got restaurants and businesses leaving the city, and people up in arms like, oh, they're taking our restaurants to do it's insanity to. It's just insanity to disregard the consequences when the evidence is there. And as a business owner, we know this very well about how we run our businesses every day. But this is us putting on our citizen hats. Sometimes I think we like to take off that cap when we get home, and it's like you don't get the luxury of doing that. You just don't get the luxury of doing that.
And the other impact about that is, people will start to not move there, not build businesses there, not own or buy real estate there. And so it'll be left to the rest of the government to effectively take care of that place. I mean, it's not like Pittsburgh's balling out of control anyways in terms of
that's the point,
economic value, but yeah, it's just only going to get worse from there.
And,
so,
it's hard to not laugh at some of this stuff because
it's just wild to me. I don't understand what they think the end game is on that, but.
And also like, it always cracks me up too, that they post these things too. It's like the criminals are like, well, having a watch party. Look at this. Wow, let's go.
We need to set up shop inside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Don't you got people in Pittsburgh? Yeah, I do. All right. So anyways, man,
what we always talk about is like one of the values of being an entrepreneur is the ability to make influence in your local community, the ability to make change, usher in change. And so if you are an entrepreneur in Pittsburgh, shout out to you. I give you a lot of credit. Sometimes, it's going to be up to you to step up and actually, run for mayor and actually make some of the change and champion the change that you want to see. Otherwise, you made your bed, shut up and speak now or forever hold your peace.
Dude, I think let's close her down with some, what did you say in the notes here?
Dems getting demolished.
Dems getting demolished.
So we'll start off with the first one, which is actually more interesting.
Yeah.
So it came out yesterday that Robert Hur, who was actually a part of the Department of Justice,
special counsel,
explicitly stepped down so that he could testify against President Joe Biden as a private citizen. Because apparently, if you work for the Department of Justice, you're not allowed to speak against the president. That's a problem. But he specifically stepped down in order to break the news that he has identified President Biden willfully retained classified materials after the end of his vice presidency.
So before you play that, can you that piece right there, what you just said, that you couldn't speak while being in the role?
I'm assuming, I don't know that explicitly, but why else would he step down?
Never build your business in such a way, please.
My team and I conducted a thorough, independent investigation. We identified evidence that the president willfully retained classified materials after the end of his vice presidency when he was a private citizen. This evidence included an audio-recorded conversation during which Mr. Biden told his ghostwriter that he had, quote, just found all the classified stuff downstairs, end quote. When Mr. Biden said this, he was a private citizen speaking to his ghostwriter in his private rental home in Virginia. My team and I conducted a thorough, independent...
So it says former special counsel because he stepped down, but...
Benny Johnson there on the post.
Yeah, people are the tide is starting to turn against we were talking about it yesterday when we were talking about ESPN.
Right.
They're defecting. We can't just continue to sit here and say what you want us to say and pretend like this stuff isn't actually happening or that it's acceptable or not ridiculous. And so I thought that was an interesting move for, Robert Hur to just step down the day before he's going to go testify so that he could testify as a private citizen.
Facts. Let's go to Letitia James.
Oh, this might be my favorite one.
Letitia James. So she's the New York Attorney General who's obviously been on center stage with everything going on with Trump.
Because of what? Because of what? Just explain it for the audience.
In terms of who she is?
Yeah, what has she been doing in her role?
I mean, just putting it frankly, she's been on a Trump crusade. She's been trying to take down everything related with the name Trump. So I don't know much about her professional career and her accomplishments, but I can just tell you that she said some questionable things in the past, stating her intentions before she was in a position to even do so with getting Trump. And she sought to fulfill those promises that she was going to take him down. So
she's speaking at the New York City Fire Department ceremony.
Yeah.
And this is the response that the crowd gave her.
She's smirking.
We're in a house of God.
And she's getting booed. Yeah, that's it.
First,
keep going.
Simmer down. I want to thank Commissioner Kavanaugh and Chief Hodges
Now they're yelling Trump.
for that recognition.
See, so her own, and you can pause it. Her own employees, i.e., the people that work for the city, do not like her, and they are vehemently against her and what she stands for and her party.
Right. See, this is the thing dude, this is the thing that really gets me, is like, actually doesn't get me. I'm being dramatic here, but these people think that they can just ignore what the people who are giving them the consent. This is how revolution is breeded. This is how conflict happens. You're going to get up there and tell me to simmer down?
Yeah.
No, I got to work in these conditions.
What's even worse is the fire chief. I can't remember her name right now. She's never been a firefighter. In fact, she's just been a political lobbyist. But she's now trying to track down those that booed them, and she's going to re-educate them. You know, so you can't speak against.
Guys, this is not leadership. That's the thing too. In this is
not leadership. It's just like one step away from communism.
Yeah. So
who's going to want to go work for the city government if you're going to remove all my free speech? Well, only people who align with you.
And it doesn't matter. And even if I do exercise it, you don't care. That's a whole different layer to the relationship too, right? So let's go into the next clip of these fantastic 4 clips here.
So this one, real quick, this one is anybody who's been alive in the last 4 years. Obviously, there was some sad feelings about Trump not getting reelected. And so there's been sentiments about, the election was rigged. I don't really know one way or the other, but the narrative has been like, shut up. You can't believe you would say that the system's rigged, blase, whatever it might be. But they have such short-term memory, because when Trump won the first time, here's what they were on.
That's
what
real
I'm
thing.
scared about in 2020.
But rightly.
Because I think he's an illegitimate president that didn't really win. So how do you fight against that in 2020?
You are absolutely right.
He's an illegitimate president in my mind.
Would you be my vice presidential candidate? Folks, look, I absolutely agree.
Trump didn't actually win the election in 2016. He lost the election, and he was put into office because the Russians interfered.
Trump knows he's an illegitimate president.
The president-elect, although legally elected, is not legitimate.
I don't see this president-elect as a legitimate president.
You said you believe that Russia's interference altered the outcome of the election.
I do. We have a president who, if in fact it is proven, has been assisted by the Russians and may in fact not be a legitimate president.
The one thing that Trump is fearful
my favorite.
when it comes to his being president is that finally we will see how illegitimate his victory actually was.
I have an objection.
I object to the 15 votes from the state of North Carolina.
I object because people are horrified.
He's an illegitimate president.
Do you believe Trump is a legitimate president?
What I believe is that there's no question that the outcome of this election was affected by the Russian interference.
There absolutely is a cloud of illegitimacy.
So that legitimacy is in question, yes.
So that was a very tainted election. And in that sense, it's illegitimate.
Why do you think the president is going to such great lengths to essentially...
Okay, we get the point.
We get the point.
The point being that the only thing you ever hear coming out of the mainstream media, which is controlled by these same people, is whatever's opposite of the other party. So if Trump wins, it's illegitimate. If conservatives say that the last election was rigged, it's like, oh, they're conspiracy theorists. That would never happen. But it's very clear that banks, governments, and major companies, Facebook,
media,
Amazon, Twitter, etc., are all controlled by the same party. And so it's just funny. Like you guys have to start. If you're listening to our podcast, you probably align with this. If you don't, and you listen to this
you
crap,
got some things to consider.
You got some things to consider, but like we need to do a better job as citizens of being informed, and we need to actually do the research, go back in history. I know everybody's so afraid to go back in history. We want to delete most of history, but the truth is these things have repeated themselves over and over and over and over again. And so do your own freaking research.
Dude, you do your own research. And then the truth is that I mean, honestly, I think there's just a silent majority, right? That doesn't have the tech leverage, doesn't have the media leverage, right? The financial institution leverage. Hence, there's more of us than it is of them.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, there's that saying that says, do you hate me because you think I hate you? Right. And so a lot of what is pushed out there by we'll call it the minority is to create the gap or the rift between the parties or the values.
Yeah. And it just seems like this is what everyone feels. But the truth is that I know people just now that I would say their voting record is largely Democrat, that over the last couple of years, we've had conversations and they've had to say, dude, we didn't agree, but we're more aligned than we ever were in light of the things that I'm seeing, because the American people, a lot of us, a majority of us still have common sense. And if you say to me, oh, the president is illegitimate, you say it for 3 years, almost 4 years, and then you turn around and say, you don't get to say it. Immediately my red flags go up. Like, dude, wait a minute. Like,
well, it's also going back to what we talked about at the beginning of the pod, but we're coming back to a time more similar to what it was like pre-World War II. This idea of what's better for the whole versus the individual. This America first mentality is rising, and we can agree on that, whether no matter what side of the aisle you sit on. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if you're a Republican or you're a liberal. If you're a career politician, I don't like you.
Because I got to question whether or not you actually understand what public service is. I got to question that. And my last point that I wanted to make sure I stress to our listeners is, like, the founders understood this in our charter documents. And I'm really just considering in my own personal lives, my own personal life, the ways that I can be of service in the local and state capacity. Obviously, we're doing it through the work we do here, but even in the actual domain of public service, local government, whether it's maybe you're not running for office, but maybe you need to volunteer for election night stuff. Maybe you need to do certain things with the school board, being involved. It's just this notion of we're just so disconnected from what's happening in our own backyards. And at the same time, we can see, by way of decentralized media, as you've been talking about, we can see the veiled, or just really, we can see that the emperor has no clothes.
Yes.
But if we're not involved, and they've been involved, people who don't care for liberty have been involved in every which way possible, from local, state, and federal. It doesn't matter how much clarity and truth go forth. The only way you're going to get there and get it back is actually through conflict. And so if you want to avoid conflict, you want to avoid the things we talk about, we have to take our own initiative in our communities and on a state level, and it'll trickle up to a federal.
Correct. I think we should just end on that. Yeah.
Fact. Well, we should almost. Have you seen this clip?
All right.
This Robert De Niro, like, look at, guys, as we wrap, this is going to be our closing clip. Listen to the words of this man. He's saying this with conviction.
Nothing at all, nothing redeemable in him. And we have to, and whoever the people are who want to vote for him, and there look like intelligent people around there. Somebody, for some reason, it can't be. It cannot be. If he wins the election, you won't be on the show anymore. He'll come looking for me. There'll be things that happen that none of us can imagine. That's what happens in that kind of a dictatorship, which is what he says. Let's believe him. Take him at his word.
I did from the beginning.
Yeah.
I mean, I said from the very beginning, this guy is never going to concede power, and he still hasn't.
No.
He still hasn't. He still admitted he lost the last election, and he advertises that he will go on. He says he's been cheated out of one term, so maybe we should get rid of the only a president only gets 2 terms thing.
Nothing at all.
Okay.
Nothing.
So
first off, dude, I hate political people. They're so slimy.
Yep.
The one thing I at least respect about Trump is he'll tell you exactly what is on his mind.
Cricket Joe.
There's no like gray area for that dude. These guys will just piss down your back and tell you it's rain. Oh, doesn't it feel good? It's warm rain.
I just submit to you guys at closing. Like, think about what he will be a dictator. He will remove Bill Maher. He will come after Robert De Niro. He is going to never leave power. He was just voted out, technically. He is going to be the king of the United States, is what they are saying. And he has desires to be so. Look at your own, through your own eyes. Forget what, that is the challenge. That's what we submit to you. Before this is believed, you may not be a conservative entrepreneur. You may be a Democrat. You may be liberal. You may be independent and moderate. But enough is enough. These people can't continue to just say these things. And then we're just like not thinking about it. And we're wondering like why the world, our country is crumbling.
That's like the antithesis of what Trump wants to do. He wants to open up the free market.
Even if he wanted to, that's the point. Even if he wanted to, he couldn't do it.
Because he doesn't control the media like they do.
He doesn't control the media. And you cannot in the United States ascend to the position of being a monarch. We came from that. You're not going to get it. You can't be a dictator in our current way unless you have a citizenry that's largely ignorant and you start changing laws and doing all that. Do you know how many steps you have to take to be in a position to be a dictator?
They act like he has like carte blanche to just do whatever he wants.
Right. Everyone who is sworn an oath to defend the Constitution is just going to lay down if a man says, I'm ascending to the rank of dictator and permanent president in chief and everything else. And they're just going to, no. And the law doesn't even allow that. That's how asinine this stuff is.
On our last podcast, they were talking about because they tried to get Trump removed for the ballot, right? But at the Supreme Court, which, there's 3 very liberal Supreme Court justices on there, they all voted 9-0 that you can't do that. And the immediate response was, it's defective.
Yeah,
we need to get rid of it because it doesn't agree with us.
Right.
It's like, holy cow. But that's the system that exists in order to prevent those things from actually happening.
Exactly.
Right? So
no way possible without the crumbling of this republic would Trump ever ascend to the position of dictator. Anyone telling you that does not understand what they're talking about. And you should also be
scare tactics.
Yeah. Be very concerned about whether or not you can relate to them and having liberty as the thing that's of interest to you. So with that being said,
it's a wrap.
It's a wrap.
This is a long one.
This is a long one. We thank you guys for listening with us. We appreciate your time. If you got value, give us a like, leave a comment. We love hearing your discussions in the comments. Leave a review, send this to someone, and most importantly, have these conversations on your own. It's not, we're doing this in our place of business.
Correct.
Do the same because that's how this republic is kept. This is Pain Points. I'm Darius, Samson. The world meets business. Take care.